but it is a pleasure to join you all. We're really glad to be here. We thought we'd introduce ourselves briefly. You can see our faces for whatever that's worth, and then we'll disappear into subject matter. But so good to be with you all. I've been joined. Some of you might recognize me. I've been with you one time before to talk about conflict management and kind of how that works in our recovery residences. But my name is Alan Muia, and I wear a couple different hats, but one of them is I am a recovery residence operator. We run 5 homes out here in Washington State, about an hour north of Seattle, and have been at this for about 12 years or so. Before that, I worked in higher education and in administration, and working a lot around, actually coincidentally, a lot around conflict with college students and helping them kind of navigate the disciplinary process, as well as the processes like the student complaint process and those kinds of things. So it seems like I've spent a lot of my working years helping people get along better and get things done, despite sometimes the human element that can get in the way. So really glad to be with you, and I'll let my colleague Briana introduce herself.
Hi, so I'm Briana Yocum, and I'm currently the Accreditation Coordinator for Walker, which is the NAR affiliate in Washington. So it's actually, it stands for Washington Alliance for Quality Recovery Residences. So I help with accreditation, and I also help with professional development events. I've worked and was a director of various recovery homes in Washington, and doing that work led me to the important skill of mediation. And I just have that passion for fostering understanding and resolution. And there's this moment when you're working through a conflict where they actually can transcend the conflict and kind of like see that shared humanity. And so that is just such a wonderful experience. I'm really glad to be here with Alan and to share our experience of utilizing this on the ground, and how you guys can utilize it as well.
Yeah, thanks, Briana. And one of our colleagues, also from our affiliate out here, named Blair Gaston, is going to join us along the way. We're going to do a role play kind of at the end of kind of talking you through what this mediation process looks like. We've asked Blair to come in and play a role as a resident in a home, and I'm going to act as mediator. And so Briana and Blair are going to take on some roles, and so you'll be able to see this thing in action. So just so you know, when the third person comes on, that is our colleague Blair, and we're really thankful that she's willing to join us. So without any further ado, we want to dive into the content, and we are going to spend 2 hours at this, which I think is a little longer than your typical webinar, but it is about 20 times shorter than mediation training that you might do somewhere else. So so we're really glad to, oh, hey, there she is. There's Blair. Blair, thank you for being here. And we're going to all jump off our cameras at this point and go back to full screen, and we're gonna start talking about content. So as Briana said, this can be so rewarding, this process. And as I think about what we talked about last time around, and those of you who caught our first webinar talking about sort of basic conflict styles, you remember that we talked about how conflict, when it's handled properly, can lead to deeper trust in relationships. And trust, as we talked about, is sort of the currency of everything we do really in recovery, but certainly in our relationships and even in our homes. And so when conflict goes badly, it can end a relationship. And this is especially important in recovery homes, where people are learning to have healthy relationships. That's part of the recovery process. So for some people, for the very first time, they're actually diving into learning to trust people, and it's a risk, and it's really difficult. So that the outcomes of a conflict could really lead someone to life or death, quite literally. And we know that this is life or death business that we're in. And so that's why we believe so passionately that if there's kind of one set of skills that we can help somebody learn while they're with us in our residences, it's how to navigate interpersonal communication, especially around conflict when things don't go well. Because in the old life, when things didn't go well, you just ran away. You just said, well, I'm done with that, and I move on. And we're trying to kind of have a new script and help people kind of come up with a different way of doing life. So all of that is to say that managing conflict in our residences is super, super important. So what we're going to talk about today is really some nuts and bolts of how we might help people do that in a really organized kind of mediation setting. So a fairly common thing that happens in our homes, and this might be true of yours as well, we have roommates, and that's kind of by design, and because we really believe in the process of people learning how to get along with each other and actually working through things together. But a really common thing that happens is that people will come to us and say, hey, I want to change rooms. And that usually within maybe a week or two of them getting with us. And then we'll run into this where they say, hey, this is not going to work. And they'll say something like, I know this kind of person, and I know that I'm not going to be able to get along with them. So I just need to change rooms and then everything will be fine. So when this happens, we don't immediately grant the roommate request. And we believe in resident choice, and them determining their own recovery path and so on. But it's really disruptive to make a bunch of moves. And if the conflict kind of follows a resident around the house, then that we haven't really solved anything. So one of the most important goals of the program is really to help residents learn how to navigate the conflict, how to do it. So instead of granting the request, we require that residents give mediation a try, that they sit down and actually work through something with their roommate and try to resolve some issues. Sometimes we'll grant the roommate request afterward. So maybe there's a real scheduling conflict where one person has late night commitments and another person has really early morning commitments, and they just, they're real pragmatic reasons why that's not going to work. But we work through the conflict first and get to a place where they actually understand each other, they hear each other, and relationship is back on even keel. And then we could talk about the logistics of a room change if it seems like there's still good reason to do that. So all of our staff members at New Earth Recovery, which is our organization, all of them are trained in mediation. We try to do that within their first year or so of working with us. And we use a really specific process that we're going to walk you through today to help residents get through that process. So we're going to walk through it today. Excuse me, the process we're walking through isn't unique to us. We didn't make it up. This is the same basic framework that mediators use around the country and around the world, actually. So with some variation, this is a really commonly used framework. And so to kind of have a grasp of it and how it works will be really helpful, certainly in this setting, but also in other kinds of workplaces and other settings that you might use it, even in family dynamics. So we're going to do in about 2 hours what Bree and I and others who've been through this did in about 40 hours. And so we're going to just really get down and dirty with the process, walk you through it, and then you'll get a chance. So we're not going to be able to go into a lot of detail on the process and the background, but we want to give you a basic format that we think you're going to be able to use in a real basic way. Having some sort of format around a conversation is better than having none. And then if you like what you're learning, we strongly recommend that you actually find a 40-hour course or whatever that looks like in your area. There are a lot of dispute resolution centers around the country who use volunteer mediators, and they offer these week-long kind of training courses to get people ready. And so we got hooked on this. And you might too. So if you like what we go over today, we really encourage you to do the longer training. So here's what we're going to do. You can see on the slide here, we're going to first go over the basic process, just the basics. We're going to talk about what happens before a mediation meeting. We're going to actually describe the actual gathering where we get together. We're going to break in, and Briana's going to walk us through a lot of the skills that are really important in the process. So a lot of things maybe some new language, but probably not. But kind of how it fits into the process is really important. We're going to then start talking about the process itself with opening statements. You'll know what that is when we get there. How to build an agenda for folks who are going through these processes, what negotiation process actually looks like, what a caucus is, which is a part of the negotiation process in some cases, what we do after a meeting to follow up, to check in to see how people are doing in the conflict. And then as advertised, we're going to spend a few minutes at the end, hopefully a half hour or so if we can swing it, to actually let you just watch a basic mediation role play that we're gonna do for you. And then we really want to spend a few minutes answering questions that you have. If you have questions along the way, you're more than welcome to put them in the chat. And we've asked John, who is the ORH moderator, if he would be willing to interrupt us if it feels like a question is really timely. Otherwise, he'll kind of keep them in the queue, and he'll moderate the little Q&A time at the end so that we can answer the ones that feel like they're the most pressing, and hopefully get to everything we can. So so that's how we want to spend our time together. Let's talk about mediation, the process itself, a little bit. So this is a basic definition, but we really like it. So it's the process by which trust is built between two or more people so that they can achieve the relationship that they desire in order to function. Sometimes there's not really a relationship they desire. They just want to solve the problem in front of them. They want the discomfort to go away, or they want the other person to go away, whatever that is. But the hope, of course, is that they actually, through that process, as we said before, can build some trust. But the participants make decisions rather than having them made for them. That's probably the thing that I would emphasize the most, is that the real value of mediation is that people are engaged in their own process. So what people are used to is kind of the people's court. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember the people's court. I think maybe it still goes on somewhere in the world, but where where the advice was, don't take the law into your own hands. Take it to the judge, take it to the court to let someone else decide who's right and who's wrong. And we are really kind of opposed to that perspective. We want to empower people to do their own decision making. So it's a process of doing that. So what mediation isn't then is solving the problem of the participants. So the mediator is not the person who is making the decisions here, but helping to kind of facilitate a process by which the people involved are really engaged in problem solving. So so what mediation, what the mediator solving the problem is something like adjudication or arbitration. And in mediation, the participants come up with the solutions. So the next thing is that it's not a quick fix. Trust erodes over time, and it's built up over time. So after one mediation session, we don't expect that there are necessarily going to be hugs at the end and everybody feeling great about each other, and we're kind of back to a trusting relationship. Often it's just the start of kind of a rebuilding process. So let's talk about what the process looks like. We're gonna walk through a little bit of the basic steps in the process, and we're gonna and the other thing too to keep in mind, you might be tempted to do a lot of note taking here. Do that if that helps you kind of stay plugged in. But we're going to send to John. We'll send the slides, and we'll send a couple handouts. One of them is a basic mediation script that I'll use at the end of our time, and the other one is kind of a basic kind of process outline that might keep you kind of plugged into what's going on. So in other words, don't feel tons of pressure to take notes. You'll get all of this, but if anything strikes you as particularly helpful, feel free to write it down. All right, so let's talk about what happens before a meeting. So the meeting, of course, is when we're getting two people together, usually two. It can be larger, but that's a little more unwieldy, and it becomes a little bit more difficult to manage. Most conflicts in a home involve two kind of core people, and if we can try to resolve it between them, and if we can try to resolve it early before it becomes huge, that is a really big deal. And so kind of it's a bit of an art to figure out when to dive in and suggest mediation. But what I'll say is, if we wait too long on that, then some real kind of what we call polarization sets in, where people just are done with each other, and it becomes much harder to rebuild any kind of trust because there's been so much damage done to the relationship. So before the meeting, then we want to ask a couple questions to prepare them, right? So we don't just go into that meeting cold. But the first one is just what are the major issues, and we want them to write them down so that they're prepared to talk about them. So really encourage them to bring some notes with them to the conversation, not as weaponry, but as just organizational tools, right? So what is it that each participant believes are the major issues? And then the next one is just what do they want out of the mediation process? Um, and so important that we are not the person determining the outcomes, but they are. And so if we had a sense ahead of time of what those outcomes could be, we might ask better questions in the process and guiding them toward some of those things. Um, and then finally, we want to let them know what the process is going to look like. So being sure that they're not going in cold, that they actually have a sense of what they're getting into. So we don't want to bait and switch. We want to be really upfront with, okay, so here's what you can expect. We might even walk them through the process a little bit that we're going to walk you through here in a minute, so that they kind of know what's going to happen. All right, so that's a really key thing, that to just and we don't skip that pre-meeting. We really want them to be kind of prepared for, because there can be a lot of kind of tension. People can feel really apprehensive about having this conversation, and more often than not, they don't have a lot of hope that it's going to work. They kind of in their heads already know, well, this isn't going to be good because I've tried to talk to this person before and it went badly. And so this is where we're encouraging people: would you be willing to trust the process? And I've seen the process work a lot of times, and so really want you to lean in and give it a shot. All right, so let's talk about the physical setup. So we're picking a location, and we want to pick a place that's neutral and safe. So we're not going to do it maybe in the bedroom that these residents share, or in a place that is sort of more kind of comfortable for one of them than the other one of them. And we want it to be confidential, and pretty much, we don't want people walking through all the time. So if you have an office in the house, or if there's a place right off, we have some coffee shops nearby that actually have little meeting rooms that you can borrow, and so just depending on your situation, but a neutral kind of a place. And then let's look at the physical setup of the environment. And this is about kind of where we sit, literally. And basically, just like it says here, we don't want the mediator to be sitting next to one person or the other. This is pretty basic, but mediator, you do everything you can to be neutral in these situations. So you have two participants. If you can be in a triad, 3 chairs, kind of all, kind of looking at each other, that's the best. If you have a couch and a chair, you want, as awkward as it might be, you want both participants on the couch and you in the chair, so that there's no sense of kind of teaming up. And those things are subtle, but they really matter in terms of kind of what the perception is going into the conversation. When trust level is really low, and we're trying to build trust, and first we have to build trust between the mediator and the participants, and then hopefully over time that trust can transfer between the participants or among them. So, all right, so next we're going to break in here, and we're going to talk about some basic communication skills. Let's go to the next slide, and I think, let me see,
Yep.
is this, are you okay? This is you, Briana, right?
Yeah.
All
I'll
right,
go
so
dive
here we
in, get
go.
it on. Yeah, and so this is really important to talk about just as you're preparing for the meeting, because these are all skills that you're going to want to utilize. This is your best tool in helping the residents or the participants in communicating, which then transfers into agreements and that trust building that Alan was talking about. So if you think about communication, poor communication skills are often at the heart of the conflict itself. So we really want to be the role model to help both parties engage in just constructive communication when it comes time to making agreements. And so you can use these skills to help better understand the dispute, but also you can use tools to help connect them as well. So we're really trying to connect both parties as well as better understand the issue. So, and here's some skills that we're going to be touching on. So we're going to talk about active listening. We're going to be talking about understanding common ground, talking about wants, feelings, and values and how those play a role in communication. We're going to be talking about reflecting, reframing, neutralizing language, asking good questions, and summarizing. So the first one we're going to talk about is active listening, because active listening is more than just listening with your ears. It actually involves your whole body as well. So the first one on here is paying attention. So for this, you just want to show them that you are open and interested in what they have to say. And this can involve, verbalizing as they're talking. You could be just saying, tell me more, little subtle things like that to show that you are interested in what they have to say and that you're paying attention. And it can also be mirroring their pace of speech. So let's say you have somebody who's talking slower than you talk, you could just reduce your speed as well and kind of mirror that pace. And then showing interest is an important part of active listening too. So this could be asking good questions to gain clarity. This could be your body language. Are you sitting a little bit forward in your chair, or are you kind of slumped down and your arms crossed? All that's really important to the perception, which does play a role because you want to appear neutral, interested, and that you care about what they're saying. Could also be your tone of voice, maintaining eye contact, and then facial expressions too, which can be a big one. That kind of leads into the next one, which is avoiding judgment. So what I always do before a mediation is I just kind of center myself a little bit in the beginning, because sometimes when things are heated, people might say things that might trigger something in you, and you just really want to be paying attention to your face and making sure that that if something does trigger you, that it's not showing in your face that you're being critical or judging the person. So just having that awareness. And then the last one would be avoiding common mistakes. So some of these just include fidgeting, doodling. Perhaps you have a pen and paper to take notes, but you're more paying attention to your paper than you are what they're saying. Another common one is just focusing on your response back so much that you actually miss what the person has to say in the moment. So all of the communication skills that we're going to be talking about in the next few slides, they all fall under that active listening, because it takes a lot to actually fully hear what the person has to say and to be able to utilize some of these skills. So. All right, so we're going to be talking about common ground, and I put two pictures of an iceberg here just to represent the participants, because a lot of times in conflict, almost pretty much all the time in conflict, some parts are seen and then other parts are hidden. And so a lot of times what we see is not always what's going on under the surface. So our whole goal in mediation is to make as many connections as possible to what's hidden. So the hidden emotions, the hidden values, the hidden interests, because that's what we can use to connect people together. So at the top here, you'll see it says my wants. So this can be seen as the issue. And this part is usually really visible because it's the conflict. It's what the person, it's their stance on what's happening. It's what they want, what they won't do. So this part's usually pretty obvious in the conflict. And then going down to the water level there where it says how I feel. So this can be partway hidden from each other. That's why it's right on the surface. So a lot of times somebody is outwardly expressing anger, but there's also some emotions under the surface. Perhaps they're betrayed, perhaps they feel betrayed, or perhaps they feel just hurt. So And then at the very bottom, hidden even deeper, is the good stuff. It's the values and the interests. And you could think of these as the needs that the participants are really trying to satisfy. So values are the person's deeply held beliefs, and it's what really guides the person's behavior and decision making, while the interests are the underlying needs and desires that motivate a person's behavior. So this is the stuff we're really trying to get to, and we're really trying to use these communication skills to bring some of this stuff to the surface, to get a clear picture for everyone, and to understand the conflict, understand what's below there, so that we can find that common ground. And here's a definition of the common ground. So it's bridging the gap between differing attitudes, beliefs, and experiences. So that just something you can always think about while you're going through the mediation is trying to identify that common value. So seeking the common value.
This is so important. Just to interrupt here for a second, but I think about the language I like to think about is the difference between issues and interests. So the issues that people bring to the table are really surfacey so
Mm-hmm.
often, and especially, and they're ones that you see over and over again so often in our world. But what we really are trying to get to is what's the main interest? What's the value? What's the thing that's getting challenged really underneath the surface? And if we can get to that kind of stuff about how people are feeling about what's really, really important to them, and that itch can get scratched, in the conversation, and an agreement can actually speak to what's important to the person.
Mm-hmm.
It changes everything. And so we pay attention, of course, to what they bring to the table, about what the issue that they bring, but we're listening always for what's under the surface, right? We're always listening for the value, or the real interest, which is a little harder to find sometimes. But hopefully through a good, honest conversation, those things start to rise to the surface, and really become valuable in making an actual agreement toward the end.
Yeah, and sometimes they come in and they don't realize that something's challenging their values or their belief system. So it's a learning experience for them as well, and that's where that good communication comes into play, and asking good questions, and saying things in a way that everyone can more easily hear, because that then opens that up. Okay, so the first skill we're going to be talking about, and you can see at the bottom here, it's reflecting. So the definition is to reflect to the person speaking the emotion and or the content of the message. So if you really just keep that in your mind, like thinking of like what's the hidden emotion under it, that's a good way to go. So and again, like I said, this just helps everybody hear the message more fully, perhaps in a way that they didn't know before. So, and it's not offering your perspective, but it's rather just focusing on what the person is saying, and just repeating back, the emotion that you feel like they're trying to express. So we're gonna show you just some examples of what this can look like. And of
Quick
course,
roll.
you're not just listening to what they're saying, but their body language and stuff can show a lot of emotion as well. So you can kind of judge based on that. Okay, go ahead, Alan.
All right, so I'm gonna be the resident here in a few of these. So I hate assigning chores to Joe. He always waits until the very last minute to do it, which means I have to stay awake in order to check and see if he got it done.
Yeah. So reflected back, I'm gonna make this bigger so I can see it. Reflected back, it could sound like this. So it sounds like you're feeling frustrated and tired because Joe tends to delay completing the chores until the very last minute. So hitting on that emotion. Okay, next one.
John is always late when I agree to pick him up from his meeting with his counselor. It's like he socializes before leaving. He doesn't care that I'm in the car waiting, and is cutting into my free time before I go to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And reflected back, it could be you feel disrespected because John is frequently late when you arrange to pick him up. It seems like he socializes before leaving, and you feel like this isn't valuing your time or respecting your schedule. And you could check in with him and say, is this accurate?
So I know we're talking about reflecting, Brianna, but this is also, both of these are a really good example of kind of softening, which we're going to talk about in a bit, or reframing. So you notice how the restatement is a notch down in kind of emotion and kind of
Mhm.
buzzwords, words that are kind
Yeah,
of triggery, and so really important that that you can do that just along the way to sort of take some of the venom out of what's being said, even in your restatement, in your
yeah,
reflecting.
yeah.
So I know
Okay.
I'm stealing thunder from later, but just pay
Yeah.
attention to that as
No,
we go.
it is important because yeah, in all of these you do that. Okay, and we're gonna have a practice one. So if you guys, I'll put just a practice statement up here and give you guys a few minutes. And I don't know how John does it, if people are able to unmute, raise their hand, or put it in the chat, but we want to give you guys the opportunity just to practice this, of how you can reflect back the emotion and the content of this statement. What do you think this person?
Yeah, everybody that wants to participate in this, just please raise your hand and I'll unmute you.
Great.
Yeah, so here's a practice statement. I'm just fed up seeing dirty clothes and messes everywhere. I've tried telling her so many times, she just doesn't listen. How can we reflect that back?
Or if you want everybody, you can type your reply in the questions panel as well.
Either way is great. Okay, so you're reflecting back. What would you, after hearing that, what would you say back to this participant? How would you sort of restate it to them? Anyone want to take a try?
I can't see the chat, so I'm not sure if anything's coming in.
Yeah, and nope, nobody wants to take a stab at this.
Okay.
Here we go, we got it.
Oh,
Great.
Hold on. Oh, they ask you to repeat it again, the
sure.
statement.
Sure. Okay. So this is, let's say someone's in a mediation and they say this. They say, I'm just fed up seeing dirty clothes and messes everywhere. I've tried telling her so many times, she just doesn't listen. What could be like the emotion that they're trying to portray? How can you say that in a way that everyone can more easily hear what she's saying, but also kind of validating her emotion?
Nothing so far, but let
Okay.
me take a
Sure.
stab at it if you don't mind.
No, I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
Uh, so what you're saying is you're feeling a little upset because of the conditions here, and what you've tried to resolve it, but doesn't seem that everybody's paying attention to what you're asking people to do.
Yeah, I think that's great. I'll show you what I
We
put.
do we do have a couple. We got a
Oh,
couple
good.
more coming in.
Yeah, let's see him or hear him.
So it sounds like you are frustrated about the messes and you don't want to constantly remind her. You just want her to do it on her own. She feels disrespected because of her living space is not clean, even though she's tried. A
Hmm.
couple more. I see you are frustrated with the messes you're finding, and or maybe more. So you've tried to say something, uh, but you're getting no changes.
Hmm.
And I understand that you are frustrated about the dirty clothes and cleanliness in your unit.
Hmm. Yeah, I would even try to think of what's underneath frustration. Because, anger is usually, or frustration is usually a secondary emotion. I would just try to think of, yeah, like how is that person feeling underneath there? So I would even
What's the
take,
value? Yeah.
yeah, a little further of like, yeah, the value and the emotion. And then I would try to neutralize it as much as possible, and we'll get into that as well, but just saying it in a way that people more easily hear. And I see some of those statements did it really well, but I think the one thing that just popped out was the frustrated language.
We got two more, and then we'll close this one out. You sound frustrated. It can be hard to deal with visual chaos. And
Mm-hmm.
lastly, so you're saying you're tired of the mess, and when you say something about it, you feel no one's listening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a lot of this too with these communication skills is when we're reflecting back, we're always thinking in the back of our head too, how is the other person in the room going to perceive even our reflection, because we want to be remaining as neutral as possible. So that's where we would avoid like saying the mess or saying things like that. You would want to try to even neutralize it in a way that even the other party isn't going to think that you're siding with the person, that you're still validating it, but that you're not siding with it. And hopefully that made sense, how I said that. But Alan, can you add?
Yeah, that's really good. As I was thinking about, and this is really great practice. And the more you do this, the more you kind of you get sensitized to language. But anything that looks like you could be, um, you want to validate, but not take sides. So if you can take any kind of loaded language out, that's
Mhm.
really helpful. And
Yeah.
you kind of, the longer you do this, the more you realize what's loaded. Um, so go ahead and read
Yeah. So
yours
the one
and
I
then.
have, and again, this isn't the only correct answer, but this is a good example of how to take maybe the word messes or frustrated out of it and just kind of really tone it down and neutralize it so that it's more digestible for everyone in the room. So while also validating. So I said, you are feeling at a loss and uncertain as to what to do from here. You feel despite the attempts to communicate, you haven't noticed any changes.
Yeah.
Okay, now we'll go on to thank you everyone for participating in that. And yeah, it's great practice and we really appreciate the participation. All right, we're gonna go on to our next skill, which is reframing. So reframing is speaking to the underlying wants, which is the values, instead of what's lacking or wrong. So you put it into a language the other party can more easily hear, just like in reflecting. So I always think just a good way to use these skills in general, because we just talked about in the slide before, one was thinking of the emotion, but not just the surface emotion, what's the underlying emotion? And then in reframing, what are the underlying values? So if you just think of when you're doing these communication skills, what's the underlying emotion and what's the underlying hidden value that could be in the statement, and trying to bring it to the surface. All right, go ahead, Ellen.
Here we go. I hate the way she talks to me. It's so rude and disrespectful. I would never treat anyone like that.
Yeah, and reframed, it could be you feel hurt over what was said and done. Respect and kindness are important to you.
Whenever the other girls celebrate my achievements in the house meeting, she doesn't acknowledge me. It's so rude. She sits there with a sour look on her face.
So thinking of, what could be the underlying values of that statement. What is she valuing? Reframed, it's getting positive recognition from everyone in the group for your achievements matters to you. You value and appreciate the support you receive from your housemates. So instead of acknowledging that she doesn't acknowledge her, you're actually touching on that you appreciate support from your housemates. Okay, and now we
If I were
have,
on that one, if I were reframing,
yeah, go ahead.
I would probably want to say, I'd want to acknowledge something about what she said, what actually happened, right? So I'd say it
Mhm,
sounds like in a couple instances, um, dot 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 dot, and I always like to start with it sounds like, so that it's like, hey, this is my take. I'm not owning it complete. I could be wrong here, um, so even softening my own perspective. So I'm not making a judgment here. I'm just saying, well, it sounds like this could be what's going on. Um, but I would try to recognize something in here about
mhm,
my achievements being celebrated, that kind of thing. Somewhere to use some of their language if I can.
mhm.
Mhm.
Okay, let's do a practice one. So I want to, oh yeah, so I'll go ahead and read it. I want to leave when she goes off like that. She doesn't let me get a word in. So this can be a practice one. We'll go ahead and throw any reframing that you want to try to do on this one in the chat, or you can unmute yourself.
Okay, we've got sounds like it's important to you to feel heard. Can you
Mm,
repeat that? Sounds like it's important to you to feel heard.
hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great one. Because again, you're trying to go deeper, and that's what I hear when I hear that statement, that feeling heard is important. Any others?
And that's all we got right now.
Okay. Go ahead and show you mine. Oh, did it show?
Uh, yes, there it
Oh,
is.
yeah, here it is. Okay. So you desire to have equal input in the conversation and you feel like what you say is heard. So you value equality in the conversation. But yeah, a simpler way to say it would be just like that comment that came in. You value feeling heard. Okay. Now we're going to move on to neutralizing language. And this is what Alan was talking about, and what we've been trying to express of removing that inflammatory or toxic language when we're reflecting or reframing. So neutralizing language, it's language that we're intentionally choosing to be neutral and non-judgmental in order to avoid raising more tension and making the conflicts worse. We want everyone to feel safe. We want them to feel like what they say matters, and we want to keep that non-threatening space to communicate their perspectives. And a lot of times this helps just depersonalize it too, so that everyone in the room is able to understand the conflict and focus on the issues rather than the personalities or the behaviors of the people talking. So really, it's such an important skill, and we do this throughout the whole mediation.
All right, here we go. She got into a screaming match with me. She needs to learn some respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a loud conversation between you that left you feeling disrespected. So you could see this framing is more neutral because it avoids that language screaming match or needs to learn some respect, and instead it just caters to respectful communication.
But it also captures what was said, so
Mhm,
I really like that sometimes we can reframe and or minimize in a way that doesn't sound anything like what was just said. And so I think this is a really good kind of restatement that says, okay, yeah, we just turned down the volume on what was said, which is a really
mhm,
nice way to think about it.
mhm. Okay.
All right, and here I go again. He purposely spilled his coffee in my car, and we got into a huge fight because he wouldn't take responsibility for being so careless. He's an idiot.
Yeah.
Looks like you shortened it up a little bit here,
Like
Bree.
common. Like Okay, so here's that neutralize. Coffee was spilled in the car, resulting in a disagreement over who is responsible. So again, this, we're taking that emotionally charged language out, like the idiot purposefully.
I like the next one here, the practice statement. It's good.
Oh, it showed up already. Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll hide that one then. All right. So practice statement. I want to discuss Becca being a slob and always leaving dirty dishes in the sink. How can we neutralize that? How can we?
So folks, use the question panel. How would you neutralize that statement? Got one here. So you think Becca could do a better job with cleanliness?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
I think that's good. It's really good. Yeah, any others?
No, we'll give it 10 more seconds here.
When you guys start
Oh,
doing this and utilizing it, I think
yeah.
it's kind of fun to try to.
We can discuss a shared chore schedule.
Yeah,
So
great.
that's jumping straight to a solution, which we're still trying to restate here a little bit. So that might be something worth heading toward. But remember, as a mediator, our role isn't to try to solve their problem for them. It's to try to get them to. So right now we're still in the stage of hearing and reflecting back what it is that they're saying, right?
Correct. Yeah, good point on. And that's where asking good questions can come into play too. You could,
And we got one more come in.
So.
I see you don't like finding dirty dishes in the sink, and there's no consensus on what constitute a clean space.
Mm. Good stuff.
Yeah, any others?
Okay, so you don't like dishes in the sink.
Yeah, short and sweet.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll show you what did it?
Yeah,
I'm
you
sorry,
got
I'm
it.
having trouble with my PowerPoint. Okay, neutralize. So you want to discuss solutions to cleaning your shared space. I heard a couple like that. All right, now we'll dive into questions, and this is great. So open-ended questions, they're such a huge component to uncover, the hidden feelings. It can also encourage a person to share, so it can expand their perspectives, and it can also make them think, orient them into the future, like what would you like to see happen? What other options have you considered? So asking these good questions can really help come up with some good agreements and just, expand. All right, so go ahead and do the first one. So
Right.
go ahead.
All I want is a clean room. Becca doesn't know how to clean it at all.
Yeah, good question could be, what does a clean room look like for you?
Yeah, I use this one a lot. That's a really common scenario and really helpful to get clarity on clean is such a nebulous term and everyone has a different idea what that is. So really trying to hone in on, does that mean bed made? Does that mean no stuff on the floor? Does it mean clear dressers? Does it mean dusted, windows wiped? Just super important to.
Yeah, perhaps her idea of a clean room is just no clothes on the floor, but the other person's thinking that she needs to deep clean it every day, or so you don't know unless you ask to get more clarity. All right, going on to the next one.
All right. She won't let me keep the light on past 9 p.m. She is totally unreasonable.
Good question back could be, why is keeping the light on later important to you?
Yeah, great.
Okay, here's another one that just can help you gather more information. Go ahead, Dylan.
Let's see. I'm not seeing anything. I'm
Oh,
just seeing the two.
here we
Oh,
go.
here we go. All right, here we go. I don't know what to say, which was true, right?
What can you tell me about this situation?
Yeah, that's good. So it just draws out, even if it's that ambiguous or sort of difficult to understand, it draws somebody out.
Yeah. All right, let's do practice one. I don't know how to stick to a cleaning schedule. They don't work for me. That could be a good question that you ask.
Question, the question is, what does work for you? Next
Yeah.
one. What about the current schedule is giving you problems? And another one. Oh, what has worked for you in the past?
Good.
Good. Those are all great. Yeah, I put on there, what other options have you considered? Those are all great. All right, now we're gonna go and just touch on summarizing a bit. So summarizing really helps just to ensure that everyone has a shared understanding of what's been said. So you can, after somebody's finished talking and you get the whole story, it's really good tool to utilize, and it just basically combines all of the communication skills, and it's also a good way to help identify areas of agreement and areas of disagreement. You can even connect them with common ground, and I'll just share an example of a summary that. Thank you for sharing your concerns and perspectives on the situation. You mentioned that it feels hard at this point because of the previous attempts to try to communicate and come to an agreement didn't go the way that you hoped. You do want to try to find a way to improve the situation, and I heard you both mention that having a clean and respectful living environment is important to you, and that you guys are willing to try to find a solution. So it's just a good way to put it all together and then check in with the person to make sure that you heard them correctly. And it's also great to identify that common ground in there as well. And then now Alan's actually going to touch on what happens in the meeting. So now we know these communication skills. We've talked to the participants beforehand to figure out what to expect. Now, how does it look like when we're actually going into the meeting, and what's the process that we use?
Yeah, so a couple kind of caveats. We can go to the next one, I think, Briana. Couple caveats is that we really want to set up some ground rules, and this just helps people kind of know the rules of the road. It creates safety in the room. If everyone knows what's expected of them, they also know what's expected of the other person. This is what's generally missing from conversations that we have kind of in unplanned ways that can kind of go off the rails, right? The spontaneous conversations that we have with people that don't go well typically are just missing some understandings about the way that we should do them. So one really great thing about ground rules in practicing this in this really structured way is it turns out these things are pretty good to use in our conversations with each other. Day in and day out. Especially the more critical and important the conversation is, the more important it might be to really practice some of these things. So we're giving people in a structured way practice in doing something that we hope that they'll kind of take from this process and use in future kinds of conversations, whether they're formal or informal, but especially about topics that are difficult or about which there's disagreement. So here are just a few, and we keep them a few so people can remember them. All right, so they're we're real careful about not overloading the ground rules so people can keep in their mind. So the first one is that one person speaks at a time. And so at the beginning of the meeting, I pass out paper and pens if they don't have them already, just so that people can And what I ask is that, hey, when the other person says something that you want to respond to, just jot it down real quick. Try to listen while you're doing that, but jot it down real quick so that you can respond later without having to interrupt. So one person speaks at a time. Use your paper and pen to remind yourself to come back to a topic, but then go back to listening if you can. All right, so then we want the participants to agree to practice common courtesy and not to act in ways that are going to make the conflict worse. So this is where I usually talk about button pushing. So I would say something typically like, now you both know that there are things that you can say in this conversation that are just going to aggravate the other person. So I want to ask if you would agree not to do that, so that we can actually get to the really important pieces of the conversation without triggering each other or pushing each other's buttons. And then the next one is that participants, we ask the participants to participate in good faith. So they're not gonna, this means a couple things. First, they're not gonna hold back important information. So sometimes we can kind of like test the water in relationships or in conversations by only kind of bleeding out a little bit of information at a time and see what happens. But that doesn't work in a mediation setting where you're really trying to get to the bottom of something. So we ask them to bring all of the information that's pertinent and bring that to the table so that we can deal with it. And then the other part of that is that they're not going to make assumptions about what the other person is thinking or feeling. So we really want them to really listen. And if you remember last time, if you were in the first webinar, we talked about seeking to understand and then to be understood. So asking people not to think about what they're going to say next, but actually to really listen to what's being said. And if we're not interrupting each other, when I go over the ground rules, I let them know, hey, we're going to come back. And you're going to have a chance to respond to what the other person says. So we'll make sure that everyone gets to say what they came to say. So you can relax into the conversation a little bit and really, really pay attention to what the other person is saying. So those are just the 3 ground rules that we ask people to abide by. And they're, as you all can imagine, we could add a lot of things to this list about what not to do and so on. But the creators of this process felt like if people really took these 3 things seriously, they would be a really good guidelines for the rest of the conversation. So common courtesy, not interrupting, and just participating in good faith. If people really did those 3 things well and really paid attention to them, some really good things can happen. All right. So let's talk about opening statements. So, and again, this is issues focused. Remember, we talked a few slides back about issues versus interest. This is where we're actually asking them to bring, all right, let's talk about the situation here. So the important questions that I asked them to think about ahead of time, I reword them a little bit differently here, but they're the same questions basically. But what brought us here? So we're going to ask each participant to talk to the mediator, to tell me, the mediator, about what happened in the situation, what brought us here, what's the pattern of things, or what, why are we here to begin with. And the second question is, what are you hoping to get out of this conversation? So we're already trying to think about hope and trying to, and so that each participant gets to hear the other person articulate something that's hopeful. They also are going to get to hear a different version of the story than the one that they tell. And in both cases, they're speaking to the mediator. So they really are just focusing on the person with whom hopefully they have a little bit of trust at this point. So just a couple logistics. Usually the person who's bringing the concern speaks first. It's not always clear who that is. Maybe you're the one who brought people to the table. So then you might be asking for a volunteer to go first. And if someone volunteers, I always check with the other person. Is it okay if John goes first? Sure, usually it's fine. And just assuring them again that you both are going to have a chance to speak, but someone has to go first. So whoever's willing would be helpful. And then the next person responds. And then the mediator is taking notes at this point. So and hopefully you'd come into the conversation with a couple notes about things that you got from those pre-conversations, the conversations you had ahead of time, so you can kind of know what's in your mind of what might be the most important topics to come to this come to this conversation. So if one of those topics doesn't come up, then a gentle prodding might be helpful to say, you mentioned something about cleanliness. Do you want to talk about that at all? Or do you want to leave it to these topics you just talked about? But there's a restatement involved. So I listen carefully, and all those skills that Briana just talked about reframing and restating and neutralizing, all of those things really come into play because the mediator is going to summarize what they just heard from the participants one at a time. And so what happens then, of course, is if the rules are followed, then we're starting to build some trust here. So if the people weren't interrupted, they got a chance to say it in their own words, and they hear back the reflection. What that does is it helps the other person in the conversation hear in a neutralized, clear way what the issues are, and hopefully even some of the interests. So we're already starting to kind of lay the groundwork for some agreements by really clearly stating what brought us here, and again, maybe even being able to hear that there might be some hope for some things to come out of it from each of the participants. So if if as a mediator I'm able to sort of get that ball rolling of a little bit of trust building, a little bit of a pattern of being able to really hear what the other person has to say, then we're kind of setting ourselves up for some good things in the next couple phases. All right. So now we're going to go to agenda building. Briana, do you want to talk about this one, or am I talking about this one?
I think I have it.
That's what I thought. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'll go ahead and talk about agenda building. So we went from opening statements, and now we're moving to agenda building. And when you transition from that, it's important to use a transition statement. I'll just give you an example. So it'd be, thank you for sharing your perspectives and listening to one another. Now that we've heard what brought us here, we can move away from the past and begin thinking about the future. We want to create a list of important issues and items for you to discuss. We want both of you to contribute, although it's not necessary that you agree on a topic for it to be listed on the agenda. What are some topics you'd like to see on the agenda? So the agenda is just simply a list of items to be discussed, and it really helps create a roadmap or a framework, you could say, to help break up the mediation and to really kind of put it into more manageable pieces. So, and it's also important because it transitions from the past to future thinking. And we can't skip over this step. So it's important, even if you feel like, oh, well, there's only one issue here. Sometimes other things do get brought up. So we can't skip over it. And it's also encouraged if one person is talking and giving more of the items to put on the agenda, that you also want to kind of prod the other person as well and get their input and encourage ideas from both people. And another important thing to do, at a lot of time, people are going to be heated, and so they'll spit something out of like, yeah, I want to talk about why she's such a slob, kind of like in the example statement, and to neutralize that. And okay, you want to talk about cleaning your shared space. So you want to neutralize it. You don't want to put anything heated up on the agenda or, with inflammatory language. So you do want to try to neutralize that. And they don't have to agree on it either. So that's important. And we want to keep it simple. They might talk about, give you a whole sentence to put on there. You just want to break it into 1 or 2 word statements. And down here at the bottom, this is just an example of some items that could come out of an agenda building. And so usually there'll be like a whiteboard that you can have it on there, and you can check it off as you go after the next phase.
For whatever it's worth, my observation in doing this a long time is that communication almost always is on the list. And when it's not, I tend to maybe prompt toward it to say, you talked a lot in your opening statements about how maybe communication went sideways between the two of you. What would you think about putting communication on the list? So anyway, that's just kind of a key one that just seems to be kind of what all this is about, right? So so often I'll prompt on that one if they don't bring it up. They almost always do, but just in case, I'll have it in my back pocket.
And sometimes they could both say the same thing, like maybe they both said a statement that would fall under respect. And so you can kind of check in with the person. Okay, so it sounds like this might fall under respect, so that you don't get a whole too many things on there. So sometimes you can kind of group them that way as well.
Yeah. So agenda building, really important. Let's I think we said we do this. Let's pause for a second. We're right smack dab in the middle of the process. I realize that, but I just want to give any opportunity for questions in the questions box there about anything we've talked about so far. So anything in the communication skills section and or just kind of the beginning parts of the process that we've talked about. Just want to break in and give you all an opportunity. Any questions? John, if you want to just shout them out if there's anything that comes through.
Yeah, nothing currently. So
Yeah, let's give it a few seconds just in case.
yeah, and if anybody needs to take a bathroom break, you can just message me on the question panel. Say you're be right back, BRB. But no questions so far.
Okay. If you go to the bathroom, you're going to miss some good stuff though. So I don't know about that, but well, I guess it helps our ability to listen along the way. Uh, So we've been, just to recap, we've had a meeting beforehand where the mediator is just getting a sense, describing the process to each participant, trying to kind of minimize anxiety, and then built up, try to get a sense of what the conversation was going to be about. We picked a neutral place for a meeting. We've sat down. We've heard opening statements from each of the participants. We've built an agenda of maybe 3 or 4 things at most to really focus on this conversation. I've been in situations that are really complicated in which we maybe did 2 agenda items in maybe 3 different sessions because it was complicated. But keeping each meeting manageable is really important.
Yeah, no questions, and everybody's
Okay.
back.
All right. Well then, here we go. So so what happens then is the actual conversation. So now instead of speaking to the mediator, the participants are going to turn towards each other, and so usually I have to sort of spell that out and say, okay, now there's a chance for the 2 of you to talk to each other and to start working on a solution here. And I reiterate what Briana said before, which is we're moving on from what happened. Even if you didn't agree totally on what brought us here or what happened, we really now want to focus on what we can do to make the future better than what we've just experienced. So, so we're moving from the past to the present and into the future, and the mediator kind of backs off a little bit. I literally kind of scoot my chair back and sort of sit back in my chair a bit, not to disengage, but to show that, all right, this isn't my time anymore. I'm gonna let go a little bit. Mediator can always jump in order to make sure that the situation stays safe. If someone violates one of the ground rules, it would be my role to step in and to remind them of the ground rule. And of course, if there's a question that would help the conversation go deeper or go to a better place, I'm more than ready to jump in with that, but to keep things on track. But generally, I'm as best I can just backing off and letting the participants start to talk about solutions. And then I'm always, even from the agenda building, I'm in my mind thinking about coming up with a list of agreements. But this is where it really gets good, in just kind of thinking about when it looks like, okay, there's something going on here. Maybe it's about the 9 o'clock lights out time frame. Maybe that only applies on certain nights of the week, and they've agreed that one person can, that the early sleeper can live with a couple nights a week where it's later, or maybe 3 or 4 nights a week when it's later, but they've got to get up early on some days, whatever that is. So that's the sort of makings of an agreement. So when I hear that, I'll seize on it a little bit and say, oh, it sounds like we're getting closer to an agreement on lights. So lights might have been the agenda item. So let's can I write this down? Are we pretty close here on lights? one thing I forgot to mention is the order in which we might take on agenda items. This is really helpful, I found. I tend to want to pick the easiest one first. And I do that in the hopes that we experience some success right away. We get a little bit of momentum and we start to build a little bit of trust. We start to build a little bit of trust in the process. For all of those reasons, if we can have a quick win at the beginning, that's really nice. So I select from that list. Usually communication isn't the one that I pick first, but it might be something that, having done this a few times, I get a sense, I think they can probably solve the light issue pretty easily if they work on it, or the borrowing stuff issue, or whatever it is. I try to pick the easiest one. So they have some success there. I just jot down. I don't get them to agree on every word because I want the momentum to keep going. But I say, okay, sounds like we have the makings of an agreement here. I'll just jot this down and we'll come back to it at the end. Okay, let's move on to the next thing, which is respect. Let's talk about that. And that's where a prompting question might be, well, John, what does respect mean to you? Could you talk about that a bit? And then hopefully, again, they start talking back to each other. What and maybe a prompting question might be, are there agreements that you'd like to make about respect? A way that I like to ask that is there something you'd like to ask of the other person that would help you feel more respected? Something like that to sort of get the ball rolling. Okay, well, I don't know, maybe if he just didn't swear at me so much. Like, okay, well, all right. So profanity is kind of a thing. Well, Jim, as profanity, would you be willing to cut down on the profanity when you're talking to John? Yeah, I could probably do that. So open-ended or questions that have that are real are really important. So someone might not agree to something, and that's okay. But we're trying to get them to understand, each other mainly. So I'm always looking for those agreements. So let's say we have 2 or 3 agenda items, and each of those generates a couple different agreements. I might have between 6 and 10 agreements in a mediation, maybe a roommate conflict or something, but there might be fewer, and that's fine. There doesn't need to be a long list, but there's some tests that when you go through a longer mediation training, you'll sort of test those agreements. But they're basically things like, are these doable? Are they realistic? Do they make sense to everybody? Do they really solve the problem? Those kinds of tests that we kind of test out the agreements to see if they are really workable. And so again, I'm not the judge of the agreements, but I might, so I would never say, well, I don't think that's going to do it, you guys. But I might ask a question. Do you think that would solve the whole problem here? If you just agreed to this, would that solve it? Or is there more that needs to be talked about here? So just trying to invite them into kind of some reality check around their agreements. Okay. All right. So that's the basic format of the actual mediation and negotiation time. Let's talk for a second about caucus. And I think, is there a slide for that? Maybe not. Oh yeah, there is. Good. We did a good job here. Sometimes we come to an impasse in a conversation where that just means a stuck place where two people it just feels like, oh, we're losing hope here. We're losing ground. We're spinning in circles. We're not agreeing on anything. And it's a really good time to call what we call a caucus. And a caucus is just a meeting. It's 2 things. It's a break. So one person leaves the room while the mediator and the second person have a conversation. And then we give the equal amount of time to the other person and the mediator. So each participant gets a break. Unfortunately, the mediator doesn't get a break, but the participants each get a break, probably to go to the bathroom. For some people, it's to get a smoke or whatever it is that helps relieve their anxiety. That can be really helpful in and of itself, just the break part. But the other part then is the conversation. And the conversation, as you can see here, is what we call doubly confidential. That means that what is said in the caucus conversation doesn't get shared with the other person unless the participant decides to share it. Okay, so it's a really great opportunity for the mediator to sort of dive into the person about how the process is going, and maybe help coach them a little bit on practicing some language Sometimes I've helped people practice an apology in a caucus. Sometimes it's just practicing making a suggestion because they feel so sort of stressed out that they can't even come up with a suggestion. But almost always I'll start the caucus with how's this going for you? How you doing? And that usually leads us to some, to somewhere, to some of those things. So usually, hopefully you can do a 10 minutes each with 10, 15 at most, maybe with each participant in that caucus time. We try to keep those fairly equal. So again, we're always paying attention to the perception that the mediator is somehow siding with one person or the other. So I generally kind of look at my watch and get a sense of where we're at. So the caucus can be magical. Really great things happen. It might be the break, it might be the cigarette or the bathroom. I don't know, but something really amazing can happen, and happens a lot of times when they just get a chance to breathe away from kind of the pressure of the conversation, and then they come back to the conversation. And very often, shortly after the caucus, some good things tend to happen. So that's the real value of caucus. Anything you'd want to throw out, Bree, about the caucus, or even about negotiation before we jump to
Yeah,
the next
just with
piece?
the caucus, I think sometimes when you go from the opening statements, then you list the agenda items, and sometimes they don't feel safe yet, or maybe their feathers are ruffled and they have their guard up, and so just going into the caucus can just give them a chance to breathe a little bit, because then they're just with you and they're like, okay, like I can let my guard down, and then yeah, there is something magical about it that can really help
Yeah.
keep things moving. So if you ever feel like that, you get to the negotiations and it's just, you could see that no agreements are being made and they're triggering each other. And they're not really letting their guard down even for a little bit, because yeah, the caucus could be a good starting point.
And sometimes we don't use it. Sometimes things move
Mhm.
along and they're able to come to agreements and so on. But this is really a great tool when there's a kind of a stuck place.
Mhm.
So, all right, I want to give one more just question break here before well, no, I'm sorry. I've got one more thing to say. Let's move on to the follow-up real quick.
Okay.
Um, so typically then at the end of the session, at the
Ones.
end of negotiating, um, I'll have a list of draft agreements, and I'll usually try to put them in some sort of shape to be able to say, okay, here's what I got. I'll make these sound better, but I'm just gonna, for now, just read these out, what I have in my notes, and see if the two of you, if I got it right, if the two of you can agree to these things. And then I'll read them. So you agreed about the time the light's going to go off. You agreed about cleanliness. You made an agreement about respect and how you're going to, and then how you're going to communicate with each other and what you're going to do when you need to confront a situation that's not going well, and how you're going to do that. So have asked. So in all of that, um, again, maybe 5 or 6 agreements. And once they've bought off on those, then what I'll do is I'll set up a follow-up time, and just simply a meeting, depending on the urgency and the difficulty of the situation. Sometimes roommates are just about to blows, or housemates are just about to blows, and so I feel like I'm going to need to check in tomorrow on how this is going. Usually it's more like 3 days, 4 days, or a week out. We can say, okay, can we abide by these agreements for the next week? And then my job right after that is to write those up and to hand each of them a piece of paper with the agreements on it, and then agree on a time where we'll check back in. And that check-in meeting is just to ask, well, how are we doing? How are we doing at keeping the commitments that you made? Is there any? Would you like to raise any concerns about how the other person is doing on the agreements? Okay, let's make an adjustment or two if we need to. And then is there any agreement we need to add that would make things even better than it's going right now? And sometimes they'll add one, and I'll add it to the list, and I'll give them the list back. Um, and it might require another follow-up meeting, but usually that's kind of more informal, one-on-one with each of the participants. But that first follow-up is good to just get them an opportunity, and more often than not, it's kind of a celebration of what went well. It's like, hey, we made something work, good for us, you know. And then and along the way, as a mediator, you're always commending the people for their good work in showing up and bringing what's real to the table and having the courage to walk through it together, getting to the end of the process, and that things went well. And look, you followed these agreements for a week. How's that feel? You know, and so being able to celebrate that with them is really important. All right, Bree, anything else on follow up from your perspective?
No.
Okay. All right, so just a question break, Q&A real quick before we dive into a role play. Any questions in the chat?
So far, no questions.
Okay, either we're doing such an excellent job, that's probably it. But if questions come up during the role play, you see something you want to ask about it, just jot it down and we'll make sure we get to it. So we're gonna dive into the role play, and then we'll do a little Q&A at the end here. So I'm bringing my colleague Blair back into the picture, and if maybe the two of you, would you be willing to have your cameras on?
Yeah,
Thanks,
give me
Blair.
1 minute. I just gotta pull up my notes.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
And then which one am I, Bree?
Kim, I believe. Hold
Okay,
on.
so same as
Let me
last time.
look at
Okay.
it again. But we'll just go Blair and Bree, so
Yeah,
not
let's do that.
Ellen.
That might be a little easier on me.
While we're getting
Oh, okay.
set up, I got a question.
Sure.
My biggest question is, what is the value of doing things in this order? So as you described it,
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's really important. So we move from kind of stating what brought us here, what we're hoping for. We build an agenda that brings the real focus to the conversation, and then we have the actual conversation between the participants. And so that feels pretty important that you've kind of set up, and you're talking about the ground rules first. You're laying all that out ahead of time so that it's really kind of organized. That again, the whole thing is about trying to build trust between two people, which means relieving anxiety, creating safety, all of those kinds of things. And so there's kind of a method to that, there's a purpose to doing it in this way so that that happens. If you skip any of those steps and shortcut them, there's a way to kind of maybe be efficient about how we do them. But if we shortcut any of those, I found the ground rules don't get followed, or the conversation isn't orderly, or because we didn't set an agenda, it just goes everywhere and we don't feel like we've accomplished anything. Because we didn't write down the agreements, we're not sure what we agreed to. So the model, each of those steps kind of has a purpose, and they tie together really well. So anyway, I don't know for sure that answers the question, but that'd be my defense of the order. So
yeah, thank you.
right. All right, so we're going to go with your real names. That'll be helpful for me. Thank you. And you know who's who in the role play. So I've just for the sake of our organization here, these two have been given a little bit of background so that they can play their roles. I'm going to be the mediator, and gonna start this out. So again, remember, you're going to have a script, everybody, so you're going to be able to you don't have to write down the language I use. That'll get sent to you. So, and that's possible too, right, John? We can send out a follow-up.
Absolutely. Everybody
Great.
attending today will get a follow-up from me with that information.
Perfect. Great. All right. So Blair and Briana, so really thankful that you're here, and I want to just talk about why we're here again, even though I've had a conversation with each of you individually. But I want to just real briefly describe why we're all together, kind of what we're up to. So you two can just relax for a couple minutes while I walk through the process, and then we'll dive into the conversation. But mediation is the two of you coming up with a solution. So it's not about me solving it. So just remember that you're the two people here that are in control. And so that's what I really like about it, is this isn't me. It doesn't really matter what I think. It matters more what the two of you want to do to resolve the issues that you've been experiencing. So just a couple logistics things. If you could make sure your cell phones are off or on silent, that would be really helpful. And I've done the same so that we all can really focus. And I've asked other residents not to interrupt us while we're in the conversation here, because it's so important. And again, I just really want to say that this kinds of conversations can be difficult. So super respectful for both of you for being willing to come and to be in the conversation and to bring your real self here. And so just want to thank you again for doing that. So again, well, I'm just going to tell you about the process a little bit, and make sure if you have any questions about it before we start that you can bring those up. So mediation, first of all, it's a voluntary process. And that sounds a little weird because I know that I asked each of you to be here and I'm the house director, but so we want you to be in the room. We've required you to participate in the process, but anything that you come up with in the way of solutions, offers, suggestions are up to you, and it's up to you whether or not you agree to those things. So you're in charge of those things. So I've required that you be here, but how you participate is really up to both of you. And I just want to encourage you to dive in and give it a really good try. And I've seen really good things happen when that takes place. So we won't, mediation is confidential. So we're not going to talk about what happens here in this meeting except for the results. And so if they involve another resident or something like that, and they're a part of the agreement, then we may need to modify that. But really, confidentiality is super important. Does that make sense to both of you? That we can keep things confidential? I'm going to, each of you brought some notes with you, and that's great and will help the conversation. I'm going to take some notes, but I'm going to do away with all the notes at the end of the session today, so that things really can stay confidential, and all that'll be left will be the agreements that you make, which I'll get to you at the end. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Only a couple major exceptions to the confidentiality that I just need to say. I don't think they apply here, but just for the record, any threat of harm to another person or property, I'm going to have to do something about that. There might have to be someone else involved. Again, I don't think that's a thing, but I just need to say it. Makes sense. And then any plans to commit or conceal any ongoing policy violations. So I'm here as a mediator in this process. I'm also the house director. I know the policies well. So if there's a policy question, I might interject to talk about that. And we probably won't need to talk much about policy here. Your issues aren't policy issues, but those would be the only cases in which we might need to talk to somebody else about what's happening here. So I'm acting today as a mediator, not a staff member, unless there's a question about policy, but I'm here to help the two of you have a conversation. And I want to be, and I plan to be, an impartial facilitator. So I'm not an advocate or a judge. I'm not making decisions here, and it doesn't really matter what I think, or who's right or who's wrong. That's not my judgment to make. So I'm mainly here to assist the two of you in arriving at a solution. So here's what I'd ask of the two of you. All right. First of all, that you would mediate in good faith. And that just means, it's kind of fancy way of saying that you'd both be willing to really listen to each other, that you'd be willing to share all the information that applies to the situation, that you'd be able to bring that forward, and that in good faith you'd share that with the other two of us, that you'd keep an open mind, and that you'd negotiate without holding to a fixed position. So that just means that you're willing to consider other options besides the one that you brought to the table, that you'd at least be able to consider what the other person might suggest. So that's what mediating in good faith means. The second thing I'd ask you to do is to abide by the rules of common courtesy. So please don't interrupt each other or use inflammatory language. I gave you both some paper and you've got pens. And so if there's something that the other person says that you want to respond to, or that kind of pushes a button and you feel like you need to do something with that, I understand that. So just use the paper, just jot it down real quick so you don't forget it. And my commitment to you is that I'll get back to you so that you can come back to it and have an opportunity to respond to that thing. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So again, asking both of you, can you mediate in good faith, and can you agree to the rules of common courtesy?
Yes.
Work? All right. How about you, Briana?
Yes.
Okay. I appreciate that. I know this isn't easy. The thing I'll add to common courtesy real quick is that there are sometimes we can push each other's buttons, and the two of you know each other well enough to know kind of what those topics or what those words might be that would push the other person's buttons, and I just ask you to agree to not go there, and that we can have a really productive conversations if you're not if you're trying, you're avoiding anything that's going to agitate the other person. Make sense? All right, so I'm going to walk you through the process here. Here's what we're going to do. In a minute, we're going to start with opening statements, and that's just an opportunity for each of you to share in an uninterrupted way what it is that brought us here, and what you're hoping to get out of the process. Each of you will be uninterrupted, and I'll go back and forth between you until you've said what you need to say in order to get the situation out there and help me understand what brought us here. And if there's anything else you need to say about the situation that brought us here, we'll have opportunity to do that. All right. And then what we're going to do is we're going to develop what's called an agenda. That just means we're going to come up with maybe 2 or 3 things that we want to be sure get talked about in the session, in the conversation. And so that kind of organizes us. It keeps us on track, and so we don't get way off. And then we're going to dive into what we call negotiating, which is just actually coming up with solutions, things that moving forward you might agree to do to make the situation better. And then if needed, and this may or may not be needed, but if we kind of get to a stuck place, we will we'll do what's called a caucus, which is just a conversation between 2 of us and then the other 2 of us, with the other person out of the room, that might help kind of get things moving again. So for our purposes today, friends, we're not going to do a caucus. Okay, just because of our time, we're gonna whip through this pretty quickly here. And I'm looking, as the 2 of you are talking and coming up with solutions, I'm going to be taking some notes in the hopes of coming up with agreements between the 2 of you. And so by the end, our hope would be that you have a few things that you can agree to that is going to make life moving forward better than it has been so far. So any questions about any of that from the 2 of you? No? Okay.
No.
All
Okay.
right. Makes sense.
Yeah.
And we are going to, for our purposes here, we're going to try and do this in about 15 minutes. Normally we're about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Okay. So we're going to, it'll probably be less than that because we want to be sure we've got time for the rest of the webinar. But normally I would just ask people if they have anything that's going to get in the way of that, or if anyone needs a bathroom break in the middle, we'll find it, that kind of thing, just to get it away with the logistics. All right, so I want to ask if we're going to start with opening statements. So remember, this is an opportunity for each of you to share your perspectives, to share what you think brought us here, and what you hope for from the process. And at this point, you're going to be speaking directly to me. So this is your uninterrupted time. So ask again that you not interrupt each other. Use that paper if you need to, and we're gonna dive in here. So and then I'll go to the other person to make sure that I get her perspective, and then we'll go back and forth a couple times. All right. So again, we'll do a shorter version of this than we might normally do. All right. So who might be willing to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay. Is that all right, Briana? If Blair goes first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. All right. Blair, go ahead.
I feel like Briana doesn't respect my space and my privacy. She leaves her things all over the place. She doesn't clean up after herself. And I feel like Briana is doing it on purpose. All the time, I ask her to clean up and she gives me rude responses, never does what I asked for, and I'm fed up with it. I can't live like this. Not to mention, Brianna doesn't even talk to me or acknowledge me this whole past month. She comes in, she makes a mess, and then she's just gone and leaves all day, and I have to sit around and look at the mess all day.
Okay. Right. I want to make sure I heard this right. You said a lot there, and I want to make sure I've got it. So let me just reflect back what I heard anyway. So it sounds like a lot of this sort of centers around respect. And at the beginning, you said that she doesn't respect your space or your privacy. And it sounds like there've been issues around both kind of how the room is, what happens in the room, and also just your own sense of being able to have privacy. And you mentioned that it feels like there might be some intention behind that from Briana, and that it's not just sort of accidental. Um, and you sounded pretty frustrated, and it sounded like your sense is that this has been going on for a while, and that it's kind of part of a pattern instead of just being a one or two time kind of thing. Does that basically cover it? We'll get maybe more specifics into that, what that looks like, but did I kind of get the big idea? Anything
Yeah,
I missed?
that's generally what, yep.
Okay. All right. So Brianna, you could bring your own answers to those questions, or if you want to respond to what Blair has said, that's fine too. And I'll make sure, we'll make sure that we get back to you if you need to say more. But again, the questions were kind of what brought us here, and then secondly, what you'd like to see happen in the process.
Okay, I can go now.
Sure, if you would.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I know I'm not the cleanest person in the world. I do try to keep the room clean. It's not like I'm just a slob. I do try to pick up. And I feel that Blair's just really oversensitive about it. I don't know if she has like OCD or what's going on, but it's just not always possible to have things super clean. I just started my visitation back with my kids, and then I'm working more, and and I'm just not interested in living up to her standards. I feel that Blair's been really rude to me in the past, and even when and she just demands that I clean it up immediately. Like, I'll be getting ready to go see my kids, or I'll be getting ready to go to work, and as I'm walking out the door, she just demands that I clean up a big mess that she says that I'm leaving. So, and I can't do that when I'm already running late. So I just feel afraid to talk to her, because it seems like every time I try to talk to her, she just turns things into an argument, and I don't know how to approach her. I just don't even think she likes me. I don't even think it's about the room being cleaned. I think she just doesn't like me. And she talks about respect, but I've let her borrow some of my things, and she's never respected any of my belongings. So we could talk about respect if she wants to talk about respect.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Brianna. Let me see if I got this. So you admitted at the very beginning that you might not be the cleanest person, which I appreciate your honesty there. That's helpful. But that it feels like that maybe Blair's making a lot of that in a way that doesn't really match with what's going on from your perspective, and that Blair is really focused on cleanliness in a way that feels really a lot stronger than your focus is. And so it sounds like you feel like she has been really, again, kind of over focused on that from your perspective, and that if she could understand the bigger things that are going on in your life, that might be helpful. Sounds like you've got a lot going on with visitation with your kids and your other commitments these days, and so you said that those things make it harder for you to be on top of the cleanliness maybe as much as you could be, but that those other things are important to you, and that's why maybe you don't focus as much on it as you could. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And you said that it sounds like the communication and maybe disrespect, it sounds like, might go both ways, and it sounds like you've had difficulty communicating with Blair, and her responses to you have been challenging. And so the two of you kind of missed each other in terms of being able to communicate clearly about things. And you said that you're afraid to talk with her sometimes, that's really strong language.
Yeah.
But if something happens in those communications that feels intimidating to you or feels like makes it really hard to approach those conversations. And then last, you said that respect is a challenge both ways, and that specifically respect for your property. It sounds like you feel like something went wrong back in terms of, I think you talked about maybe her borrowing your things or something, that something didn't go right there, and that didn't feel respectful to you. So that respect is an issue for both of you, and you both seem to care about that. Anything I missed there? Does that sound like that's the bulk of it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, let's I'm going to skip going back and forth. Normally at this point, I would just ask, I'd ask Blair if there's anything that Briana said that she'd like to respond to.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure there would be. And then I would go back and forth a couple times. So by the time we're done with this opening statements piece, it would feel like both of them have said what they came to say about what brought us here. And even if they disagree about the tone and the responsibility of the other person, it's kind of out on the table. Hopefully it's neutralized at some level, and we can kind of move on to the next phase. So what we're going to do next is just build a brief agenda for the conversation that needs to happen next between the two of you. So if you think about what you talked about in the opening statements, what might be just a real quick way, so some words that you might use to like basically agenda items, right? Like what kind of agenda items would we put on the table for our upcoming, for just to negotiate some solutions? I heard something about cleanliness. That felt pretty important. And would that be, can we start off with that? That seems pretty obvious. Can we start off with that one
Yeah.
to talk about what that means?
Yeah, I think definitely we can talk about what clean means.
Okay.
Because I definitely feel like I'm entitled to a clean space.
Okay. Yeah. So cleanliness. What else?
Let's talk about schedules, because yeah, I mean, I can clean real good on maybe one day, which I have been doing, so it's not like I'm a slob or anything. But
Okay.
I just schedules. She should know what to expect, I guess.
Okay,
So
well
it might
then
help.
maybe we should talk about communication, because I'm pretty sure you've told me a few times that you'd clean it and it's still messy.
Okay. All right. We'll talk about. We'll add both of those things. That sounds good. So schedules, it can mean a lot of different things, but it sounds like maybe the two of you being able to hear each other about what's going on there could lead to some good maybe agreement. Communication, really powerful. So if we talked about cleanliness and schedules and communication, would there be anything else that feels, any other big ideas that you two talked about?
Respect for my belongings, because
Okay.
yep.
So I heard respect from both of you a couple times. Should we just add the word respect to the schedule and we can kind of talk about what that means for both of you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to shortcut the process again, and we're going to just do a super brief negotiation. See if we can wrap this up in a couple minutes, you two. Uh, um, we're skipping the part where they yell and they misunderstand each other, and it is difficult. But again, if they're following the ground rules, we're trying to minimize some of that drama, right? So that we can actually have real deal communication. But I don't know, if you want to yell, it'd be kind of fun. But let's jump to, so I want to, we have this agenda. Thank you two for being so clear about the kind of things that you want to talk about. And if we could get to some resolution, could be really, really helpful. So again, we're going to focus not so much on what has happened, but on what you would like to happen. What would make life in your room better for both of you, right? So and I think I wonder if we could start with, maybe let's start with schedules that's connected to cleanliness, but I'd like to hear a little bit about, I think, Briana, this was your suggestion to talk about schedules. Could you maybe just kind of lead out and what's on your mind about schedules, and is there some, maybe be thinking about what could we agree to about scheduling?
Yeah, so it seems like Blair, every time she, like, it's always when I'm leaving out the door that she wants to bring up cleaning. And I just want her, Blair, I want you to know that, you know, I just restarted the visitation with my kids, and it's been really hard to, you know, pay attention to that kind of stuff. You know, I've never learned how to really clean. My mom was always disorganized. And my schedule, I'm just busy. It's not that I'm trying to disrespect you. It's that um, I want to see my kids and I want to get to work so that I can have money so that I can live here. So I guess I'm not trying to be rude, but it might appear that way because I'm flustered and I'm going out the door really fast. And yeah, so I'm just got to a point where I'm kind of fed up with it. So I work, let's see, Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday, and then I work on Sunday, and then I have visitations with my kids afterwards for like an hour. So
What would be helpful, Brianna, about schedules? So it might be helpful just for Blair to know those things, but what would you ask of her to do differently related to your schedule when she's got a concern, especially about cleanliness or anything else for that matter?
just not when I'm walking out the door and I'm stressed out already. I mean, finding a different time to talk to me about it, perhaps, or just understanding that. I mean, I don't even know what she wants me to do really, because I feel like I keep things clean. Like it's not like there's stuff all over the counters and stuff. I mean, I guess I'm not understanding like how I'm being messy.
Hmm. What do you think, Blair? Anything about schedules or about when you have these conversations that might be helpful for the two of you to talk about and think through?
Yeah, I think I could do a better job of when to talk about it. I'm probably bringing it up when I'm like feeling when it's like really chaotic and for me, because like just when I see a mess, it reminds me of when I was living on the streets and in my addiction. And so I just really respect cleanliness now. It makes me feel more safe and comfortable. And like, I think if I just maybe handle when I have the conversations like Brianna suggested, that's probably helpful. And I'm sorry about the stain on your shirt, but I feel bad about that. I would be pissed if you did that to me. So
Yeah, we're going to get to that conversation. We'll talk about things and respect, but I appreciate that.
just on my heart right now, I had to say it.
Yeah. So one agreement might be that Blair agrees. Well, Blair agrees to pay attention to the timing of when she's bringing it up. Is there a time? I just ask that question. Is there a time two of you could connect about just all kinds of things, big and small? Like, is there a time, Brianna, that's kind of convenient for you that might be a good time for Blair to bring something up?
Just not when she's like, I feel like she knows that I'm right about, because she's in the room, she sees me like getting ready to leave, and then she brings it up. So, just not when I'm just trying to talk to me when I'm there and present instead of when I'm walking out the door. So,
I mean, even is there like a day of the week when, I mean, not to get super specific about it, but is there a time where you just know that you're just in a better space to be able to receive?
yeah, in the evenings, usually the mornings and the afternoons are busy, but in the evenings.
Okay, all right. Okay, well, that's the makings of an agreement, and we're not gonna get to the hardest issues because of timing here, but we hopefully have a little bit of ground that we're building there toward that. So um, I'm super thankful for both of you. I think we'll jump to maybe some Q&A with the group now, but thank you both for that excellent acting. If we could all clap, I don't know how that works online, but well done. So, all right, John and company, I guess would like to open it up now. Brianna, anything before we, just as people are gathering their questions, maybe in the question box, anything that you feel like we should add to the mix here in the way of kind of final words about the process, or how this works in houses?
Hmm. No, I'd just be curious to hear any questions anyone has, because again, I mean, there's so much information that we're trying to condense that I could easily understand, like, because it makes sense in my brain, but I want to know from your guys' perspective what doesn't make sense about the process, or if it does make sense. That way I can better help.
Sure. Yeah. The
Yeah.
question here is, so, Brianna, I'm paraphrasing this question, is so Brianna's, when she stated her stuff, it was quite a bit. And, kind of the goal is to kind of acknowledge what she said back to her, so
Mhm.
that as she understands that you understand where she's coming from.
Yeah.
But we're not to use pencil and paper so that we can say, well, she's got to complain about missing her, she doesn't want to miss her visitations, she's got a job to do, and it's in this and this. So is there any tips or tricks to, it's easy when somebody says, I'm pissed at you because you didn't clean the bathroom, period,
Yeah.
as opposed to somebody saying, I got this, I got that.
Yeah. Well, I do take notes for whatever that's worth. So as a
Okay.
mediator, I'm jotting down pretty quick as I can, just some big ideas, just so that I can do that summary. And it always is complicated. That was a really simple version that you got
Yeah.
today, I think. So it's always a lot, and it's usually pretty loaded. And so there's a lot of kind of shifting that has to happen in terms of just those restatements and those kinds of, and neutralizing and so on. And so when we do that, we really do try to be as thorough as we can. We can overdo it too. So the big idea is to really get the big stuff, but we do write it down.
Good, good. I missed that part. Question. This is very useful. I like the process when we're handling conflict resolution between two residents. Do you handle conflict resolution between a resident and recovery housing staff in the same fashion?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think so. But the staff I would want to sit down with the staff and try to be uh, comfortable. What's going through my head right now is there are times where staff are going to feel like somehow I'm giving the resident too much airtime, and I just need to support my staff member. So this is Alan, the supervisor, talking now, right? So,
Mhm.
so it's a challenge because we want to support our staff. We want them to feel like that they are valued, and that the decision that they made is supported, or whatever that looks like. Um, so if there's a conversation to be had about a call that a staff member made, or something like that, I would want to have that conversation first and really try to process that with them. If there's some sort of correction that needs to happen or anything like that, I would want to get that done first. And then I would want to say, okay, so now there's this relationship challenge between you and the resident, and would you be open to sitting down in a three-way conversation and working through that? Um, and I might not do the full-on process, but I would do some version where each person gets to articulate where they're coming from and so on. It's a little trickier because the roles are different. But yeah, I would certainly use a version of this for that.
Um, Ray says, thank you. That was very helpful.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Um, just reading here, a lot of people are saying things like, you guys are doing a great job. This training was awesome. So
Good.
I don't have any other questions at this time.
Okay.
Great. Well, it's super. As you can tell, we're kind of jazzed about the process. We've seen it work a lot of times. It's just magical. I don't say this lightly, but when people work out a dispute in this process and things go better and their relationship deepens and gets better and this becomes kind of a building block of their relationship, I tell residents that is just better than crack. And so, and then they look at me and they say, well, how do you know? And I say, well, actually I don't, but it's really, really good. The fruit is better, right? Like what comes up as a result of that is so much better. And so um, I just can't say enough how much we've been able to utilize this. So if you have the opportunity to do a longer version and really kind of dive into this process, it'll just get better and better. And again, you'll find other applications for it outside of even houses, but in other kind of spheres of your life. So we hope that for
And
you.
I'm going to jump in. Uh, some folks say the process is very healthy and allows individuals to be heard and hear one another. And let's see, I got a question. I think it's important for the resident to understand what will happen if they don't come to a resolution or they don't follow through on the mediation meeting.
Yeah, it's a good question. So will we put the hammer down if this is my language, but will the resident get in trouble or face some sort of consequence in the house if they don't comply with the standard? It's a good question. I think the answer is it depends. In my situation, I think there are times where we would say, hey, we require people to participate, and in good faith, we trust that they're going to come up with agreements. If they come up with agreements, we ask them, are you willing to commit to these agreements? So they do that. And if they don't, then there's another conversation. I try not to make that necessarily a disciplinary one. But if they're kind of brushing up against policy about being disruptive in the house or being, kind of creating chaos or drama, that really is a house policy that we have, then I can try to shift it. So I'm trying to resolve it on the person to person level first, and which almost always kind of alleviates the challenge. But some folks just have challenging personalities and they take that to every relationship that they're a part of. And so we might solve a problem about cleanliness in a room, but that's only one of 10 things that this person kind of brings to the table. And so just because they go through this process doesn't mean that they're not subject to other kinds of action on our part in order to keep peace in the house. Might need to be a whole separate thing that happens there. I think I would stray away from saying, well, if you don't keep these commitments, then you're subject to disciplinary action. I don't know that I would draw that line quite so plainly, but depending on the situation, it might be. If their behavior is really disruptive and their roommate is just doing their best to make it work, and it's a one-sided deal where one person is just checked out and not playing, then that's a longer conversation. It's worth having.
You mentioned that this is obviously a 2 hour of a 40-hour training or
Yeah,
something to that effect.
yeah,
So does Walker, is that how you say that?
yeah, Walker.
WAQ Walker. Do they put that on, or do you travel to put this on, or?
No, we don't. The dispute resolution center in our local community where Briana and I did our training, we got it there. So it was an external agency who that's what they do, and they're actually they're in a lot of communities will have a dispute resolution center that helps people in the divorce process, working through parenting plans, or helps people in small claims court do mediations and so on. And so that center uses Volunteers of America is kind of who runs it in our neighborhood. And so they have a lot of volunteer mediators who get this training and then they go and help out in these different situations. And so then those organizations then kind of train their own. And so that's where we were able to go and get training. There would be other kinds of organizations like that out and about that would do that.
y- uh, don't have any more questions, but you said you're going to be at NAR in
Yes, sir.
Michigan this year. And
Uh-huh.
what are you presenting on?
Well, we're going to do this. We're going to do a version of this, the live and in-person version. Um, and so again, we actually have two 1 hour time slots. They're going to have to be split up, but that might give people a chance to digest things a little better. But we're going to give it a shot. We're going to do it live and in person and see if we can't help others kind of get their arms around the process. So if
Yeah.
you're going to be at NAR, anyone who's able to go to that conference and you want to digest this a little more, come see us there.
We're at 2:59, so I want to be
Right.
mindful of people's time.
Great.
And speaking for Ohio Recovery Housing, I want to thank all three of you for presenting today and give you an opportunity to final comments.
None for me. Thanks for having us.
Yeah,
Briana, Blair?
thanks so much.
Okay, well,
Thanks, guys.
you're welcome. Thank you, Blair. And so, Alan, you're going to be sending me some information within the next couple of days.
Yes. Yep. That we
And
can pass along.
great. And then I'll share with all our attendees today. And I want to thank everybody for participating.
Great.
Thank you
All right.
guys so much.
Thanks
Have a
all.
good
Take
day.
care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.